The days following Kate's passing moved both painfully slowly and startlingly fast. William found himself trapped in a strange state of suspended animation, where he functioned mechanically through the necessary tasks of funeral arrangements and family obligations, while feeling completely disconnected from the world around him. Sarah and Michael handled most of the practical details, understanding that their father needed time to process the enormity of his loss. The funeral service was held on a bright spring morning that Kate would have loved. The church was filled with people whose lives she had touched over the years. Longtime neighbors, former colleagues, friends from various stages of their marriage, and 3 generations of family members. William sat in the front pew, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, listening to story after story about Kate's kindness, her humor, her unwavering loyalty to those she loved. Father Matthews delivered a eulogy that captured Kate's essence perfectly, speaking about her as a devoted wife, loving mother, and faithful friend who had lived her life with grace and purpose. He shared the story of how Kate and William had met in the university library, how their love had grown and deepened over 4 decades, and how their devotion to each other had inspired everyone who knew them. William found comfort in hearing their love story acknowledged and celebrated by their community. The burial was private, attended only by immediate family. As they lowered Kate's casket into the ground beside the rose garden plot they had selected years earlier, William felt a finality that was both devastating and strangely peaceful. Kate was at rest now, free from the confusion and struggle that had marked her final months. The simple granite headstone bore her name, dates, and the inscription they had chosen together. Beloved wife, mother, and friend, her love remains. Returning to their empty house was perhaps the most difficult moment of all. The rooms that had been filled with medical equipment, family members, and the constant activity of caregiving were now silent and still. William walked through each room slowly, touching familiar objects and remembering the life they had built together within these walls. Kate's presence seemed to linger in every corner, making her absence feel both more painful and more comforting. The letters Kate had written during her clearer periods became William's lifeline in the weeks that followed. Following her careful instructions, he opened the first one marked after the funeral. In her familiar handwriting, Kate had written words of comfort and encouragement, reminding him of their love and urging him to find ways to live fully in the years ahead. Don't spend all your time missing me, she had written. Spend some of it remembering how lucky we were to have each other. Sarah and Michael wanted William to move closer to one of them, but he couldn't bear the thought of leaving the home where he and Kate had shared so many memories. Instead, he began the slow process of learning to live alone, establishing new routines that honored their shared past, while acknowledging his changed circumstances. He kept Kate's coffee cup in the cabinet but learned to make coffee for one. He maintained her rose garden but planted new varieties alongside the old ones. The grief counseling sessions that Janet had recommended proved helpful, though William initially resisted the idea. Being in a room with other widows and widowers made him realize that his experience, while uniquely his own, was also part of a universal human journey. Hearing others speak about their losses and their gradual healing gave him hope that the crushing weight of sorrow might eventually ease into something more manageable. 3 months after Kate's passing, William opened another letter she had written. This one marked when the loneliness feels unbearable. Kate had somehow known exactly what he would be feeling and when he would need her guidance. She reminded him of their happiest memories together and encouraged him to reach out to friends and family when isolation felt overwhelming. Love doesn't end with death, she had written. It just changes form. Let our love help you find your way forward. William began accepting invitations from friends who had been patiently waiting for him to emerge from his initial grief. Dinner with the Andersons, coffee with neighbors, Sunday visits with his grandchildren gradually helped him reconnect with the world beyond his memories. He discovered that talking about Kate with people who had known and loved her was healing rather than painful. Sharing stories about her life seemed to keep her spirit alive in new ways. The first anniversary of Kate's diagnosis arrived, and William marked it by planting a memorial garden in their backyard. He included Kate's favorite flowers alongside new varieties that symbolized hope and renewal. As he worked in the soil, he felt connected to both his past with Kate and his future without her physical presence. The garden would change and grow over the seasons, just as his grief was slowly transforming into something that included both sorrow and gratitude. As William looked back on their final year together, he realized that witnessing Kate's graceful acceptance of her illness had taught him profound lessons about love, courage, and the preciousness of every moment shared with those we cherish. Their silent goodbye had been filled with more love and meaning than many people experience in a lifetime. Kate had shown him that dying could be approached with dignity and peace, and that true love could transcend even the ultimate separation. Standing in their garden on a warm evening, watching the roses Kate had planted decades earlier bloom once again, William understood that their love story hadn't ended with her death. It had simply entered a new chapter, one where Kate's influence would continue to guide him toward whatever adventures and joys still awaited him. The silent goodbye that had once seemed like an ending now revealed itself as a transformation, a bridge between the life they had shared and the life he would continue to live in honor of their extraordinary love. The morning of March 15th arrived with an unusual stillness that seemed to permeate the entire house. William had been awake since dawn, sitting beside Kate's bed and watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept. Her breathing had become more irregular over the past few days, with longer pauses that made his heart race until the next breath came. Janet had explained that this pattern was normal, part of the body's natural preparation for what was to come. Kate's eyes fluttered open around mid-morning, and for a moment they held a clarity that William hadn't seen in weeks. She looked directly at him, and he could see recognition there, a spark of the woman who had shared his life for over 4 decades. "William," she whispered, her voice barely audible but unmistakably present. He leaned closer, taking her hand in both of his, feeling the familiar warmth of her palm against his skin. "I'm here, my love," he said softly. "I'm right here with you." Kate's lips curved into the faintest smile, and she squeezed his hand with surprising strength. For several minutes they simply looked at each other, communicating in the silent language they had developed over their years together. No words were needed to express the love, gratitude, and acceptance that passed between them in that sacred moment. Sarah and Michael had been called to the room, and they gathered around their mother's bed with a mixture of heartbreak and reverence. Kate turned her head slightly to acknowledge their presence, her eyes moving from one beloved face to another. "My beautiful children," she managed to say, though the effort clearly exhausted her. They each took turns holding her hand, telling her how much they loved her, sharing final words that would have to last a lifetime. As the day progressed, Kate's periods of consciousness became shorter and less frequent. She would drift into sleep for hours at a time, then surface briefly to the sound of familiar voices or the touch of loving hands. The family maintained their vigil, taking turns sitting beside her, reading her favorite poems, playing soft music, and sharing stories about happier times. The room filled with an atmosphere of love so dense it seemed almost tangible. Father Matthews arrived in the afternoon to offer final prayers and comfort to the family. Kate's faith had always been a source of strength for her, and even in her diminished state she seemed to find peace in the familiar words of blessing and hope. The priest spoke about the love that transcends physical death, about the bonds that connect souls across time and space. His words brought comfort to everyone present, reminding them that what they were witnessing was not an ending but a transformation. As evening approached, Kate's breathing became even more labored, with longer intervals between each breath. William could see that she was working hard now, fighting to stay present for just a little longer. He leaned close to her ear and whispered the words that Janet had suggested, giving her permission to rest, telling her that it was okay to let go, that they would all be all right. The words felt like they were tearing his heart apart, but he knew they were necessary. The house grew quiet as night fell, with only the soft sounds of Kate's breathing and the gentle murmur of family members sharing memories in hushed tones. William held Kate's hand continuously now, afraid that if he let go she might slip away without him noticing. Her skin felt cool and fragile like parchment, but her pulse continued its steady rhythm against his fingers. Around midnight, Kate's breathing pattern changed again, becoming very shallow and spaced further apart. The family gathered closer, instinctively understanding that they were approaching the final moments of Kate's journey. William positioned himself so that he could hold her hand while also seeing her face, wanting to be present for whatever came next. Sarah and Michael stood on the other side of the bed, their own hands resting gently on their mother's arms. In the silence between breaths, William found himself remembering their wedding day, The moment when Kate had walked down the aisle toward him with such joy and confidence in their future together. He remembered the births of their children, the way Kate had looked at each newborn with wonder and fierce protectiveness. He remembered countless ordinary moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now revealed themselves as the true treasures of their shared life. Kate's eyes opened one final time, and she looked directly at William with an expression of such profound love and peace that he felt simultaneously broken and healed. She didn't speak, but her gaze conveyed everything that needed to be said. In that look, he saw gratitude for their life together, acceptance of what was happening, and a love that would outlast her physical presence. She held his gaze for a long moment as if memorizing his face for whatever journey lay ahead. Then, with a gentleness that seemed to encompass her entire being, Kate simply stopped breathing. There was no struggle, no distress, just a peaceful transition from presence to absence that left the room feeling both empty and somehow sacred. William continued to hold her hand, waiting for another breath that would never come, feeling the moment when the woman he had loved for 43 years finally let go of the world and moved beyond his reach. The silence that followed was profound and complete, broken only by the soft sounds of family members crying and whispering prayers. William sat motionless beside Kate's still form, his hand still clasped around hers, feeling the enormous weight of their shared life and the equally enormous emptiness of his future without her. In that moment, he understood that while Kate's physical presence was gone, the love they had built together would continue to exist, changed but not diminished, in his heart, and in the hearts of everyone whose lives she had touched. March brought the first hints of spring, and with them a noticeable change in Kate's condition. She was sleeping almost 16 hours a day now, waking only for brief periods that seemed to require enormous effort. Her appetite had nearly disappeared entirely, and William found himself coaxing her to take just a few sips of water or a small spoonful of her favorite soup. Each successful attempt felt like a small victory against the inevitable. During her waking moments, Kate seemed to exist in a dreamlike state between sleep and consciousness. She would open her eyes and look around the room as if seeing it for the first time, her gaze settling on William with a mixture of recognition and confusion. Sometimes she would smile at him with such pure love that he felt his heart might break from the intensity of it. Other times she would seem to look right through him, as if he were a ghost from a life she could no longer quite remember. William had learned to treasure these fragments of connection, no matter how brief or incomplete they might be. When Kate squeezed his hand in response to his touch, when she leaned into his embrace as he helped her sit up, when she whispered his name in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her again, he felt the presence of the woman he had married all those years ago. Love, he discovered, could exist in the smallest gestures and the most fleeting moments. Janet, the hospice nurse, had become a daily presence in their home. She helped William understand the changes happening in Kate's body and mind, explaining that this gradual withdrawal was a natural part of the dying process. "She's getting ready to let go," Janet explained gently. "Your job now is just to let her know it's okay, that you'll be all right, that she can rest." The idea of giving Kate permission to leave him felt impossible, but William was beginning to understand that holding on too tightly might be causing her unnecessary suffering. Their children had both taken extended leave from work to be present during this time. Sarah slept in the guest room down the hall, and Michael had moved into the basement apartment they had built years ago for visiting relatives. The house was full of family again, but the atmosphere was subdued, reverent, as if they were all participants in a sacred ceremony that none of them fully understood. Kate's breathing had become more labored, requiring frequent adjustments to her position and the occasional use of oxygen to help her feel more comfortable. William learned to read the subtle signs of her discomfort, adjusting pillows, changing her position, or simply holding her hand until the difficulty passed. These intimate acts of care had become his primary language for expressing love, when words no longer seemed adequate. The visits from extended family and old friends had taken on the quality of final farewells. Though no one spoke explicitly about endings, people would sit quietly beside Kate's bed, sharing memories aloud or simply being present in the room where she spent most of her time. Kate seemed aware of these visits on some level, even when she couldn't respond verbally. Her breathing would sometimes change when familiar voices filled the room, and occasionally she would open her eyes at the sound of a beloved grandchild's laughter. William had begun sleeping in a chair beside Kate's bed, unable to bear the thought of being in another room when she might need him. The chair was uncomfortable and his back ached constantly, but the alternative of leaving her alone felt unthinkable. He would doze fitfully, waking at every change in her breathing pattern or movement, ready to offer comfort or assistance at a moment's notice. One evening, during a brief period of lucidity, Kate looked directly at William and spoke with startling clarity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking such good care of me. I know this is hard for you." Her words were like a gift, confirmation that somewhere inside her failing body, the Kate he had always known was still present, still aware of his love and sacrifice. He squeezed her hand and told her it was an honor to care for her, that he would choose to do it again without hesitation. The house had taken on an atmosphere of expectant waiting. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, and everyone moved more carefully, as if sudden sounds or movements might disturb something precious and fragile. Sarah had taken over most of the household duties, ensuring that William ate regular meals and attended to his own basic needs. Michael handled the continuous stream of phone calls from concerned friends and relatives, shielding his father from the emotional burden of repeated explanations and updates. Kate's periods of restlessness had increased, and she would sometimes attempt to get out of bed as if she had somewhere important to go. William and the nurse recognized this as another common part of the dying process, a phenomenon they called traveling. Kate seemed to be preparing for a journey that only she could understand, and William's role was to provide comfort and reassurance during these episodes of agitation. The letters Kate had written during her clearer months remained unopened in their designated box, but their presence provided comfort to the entire family, knowing that Kate's voice would continue to speak to them in the months and years ahead, made the impending loss feel slightly more bearable. She had found a way to extend her love beyond the limitations of her physical presence, ensuring that her wisdom and affection would continue to guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Dr. Peterson's visits had become more frequent, focused entirely on comfort measures and pain management. He spoke with gentle honesty about what the family could expect in the coming days or weeks, helping them understand the signs that would indicate Kate's final transition was near. His presence brought a sense of medical expertise to their vigil, while respecting the deeply personal nature of what they were experiencing together. February arrived with a brutal cold snap that kept them indoors for days at a time. Kate seemed to retreat further into herself during this period, spending long hours sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, watching the bare tree branches sway in the wind. She spoke less frequently now, but when she did speak, her words carried a weight that suggested she was processing thoughts too complex for her compromised mind to fully express. William had established new routines to accommodate Kate's changing needs. He would wake up several times each night to check on her, ensuring she was comfortable and safe. Sleep had become a luxury he could rarely afford, but he found energy and purpose. Every small act of care, from helping her brush her teeth to making sure she took her medications, felt like an expression of their decades-long love story. The visits from family and friends had become more structured and brief. Kate could still recognize most people, but extended social interactions exhausted her and sometimes led to confusion that lasted for hours afterward. Their closest friends, the Andersons, who had shared countless dinner parties and weekend getaways with them over the years, now came for quiet afternoon visits, content to simply sit in Kate's presence without expecting conversation. Kate's relationship with food had changed dramatically. She would forget to eat unless reminded, and when she did eat, she sometimes forgot how to use utensils properly. William learned to prepare foods that Kate could eat with her hands, and he discovered that she was more likely to eat if he ate alongside her. Their meals became exercises in patience and creativity, with William finding ways to make nutrition appealing and accessible. One afternoon, while helping Kate get dressed, William noticed that she was studying her reflection in the bedroom mirror with intense concentration. "Who is that woman?" she asked quietly. William's heart broke as he realized that Kate no longer recognized herself. He stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and said gently, "That's you, my beautiful Kate. That's the woman I've loved for 43 years." She leaned back against him, accepting his words even if she couldn't understand them. The seasons of their marriage had taught William that love could take many forms. In their youth, love had been passionate and urgent, full of dreams and plans for the future. In their middle years, love had been practical and supportive, focused on raising children and building a life together. Now in these final months, love had become an act of pure service, requiring nothing in return except the privilege of caring for the person who had given his life meaning. Kate began sleeping more during the day, often dozing in her chair while William worked quietly nearby. He would use these times to handle practical matters, paying bills, scheduling medical appointments, coordinating with their children. But mostly he would sit across from her, memorizing the peaceful expression on her face, storing up these images for the lonely days he knew were coming. Their daughter Sarah had become Kate's unofficial biographer, recording stories and memories whenever Kate was lucid enough to share them. Sarah would ask about Kate's childhood, about her courtship with William, about the early days of their marriage. Kate's responses were often fragmented and non-linear, but Sarah patiently pieced together a narrative that would preserve their family history for future generations. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for an inevitable conclusion that no one wanted to acknowledge. William had begun sleeping in the guest room adjacent to their bedroom so he could hear Kate if she needed him during the night. The baby monitor he had installed allowed him to listen to her breathing, finding comfort in the steady rhythm that confirmed she was still with him. Kate's conversations with invisible visitors had become more frequent and more detailed. She would spend entire afternoons talking with her mother, describing their current life and asking for advice about things that worried her. William learned to listen to these one-sided conversations, gleaning insights into Kate's inner world and the concerns that occupied her mind even when she couldn't express them directly to him. Dr. Peterson had introduced the concept of hospice care during his last visit, explaining it as a shift from treatment to comfort, from curing to caring. The word hospice felt like a surrender to William, an admission that they were entering the final phase of Kate's journey. But as the doctor explained the additional support and resources available, William began to understand that hospice care was actually about living as fully as possible in the time remaining. The hospice nurse, Janet, brought a different energy to their home when she began her regular visits. She had an immediate rapport with Kate, speaking to her with the easy familiarity of an old friend. Janet taught William about comfort measures, pain management, and the signs to watch for as Kate's condition progressed. More importantly, she helped him understand that his instincts as Kate's loving partner were often more valuable than any medical intervention. Kate had developed a fixation on organizing things. Though her organizational system made sense only to her, she would spend hours arranging and rearranging items on her dresser, creating patterns and groupings that seemed random to others, but clearly held significance for her. William learned not to disturb these arrangements, understanding that the activity gave Kate a sense of control and purpose when so much of her world felt chaotic. The winter evenings were long and quiet, filled with a peacefulness that felt both beautiful and heartbreaking. William would read aloud to Kate from books they had enjoyed together over the years, and sometimes she would close her eyes and smile, following the familiar stories even when the words themselves had lost their meaning. These reading sessions became a bridge between who Kate had been and who she was becoming, honoring both versions of the woman William loved. The first snow of winter arrived early that year, blanketing their garden in pristine white. Kate stood at the living room window, pressing her palm against the cold glass as she watched the snowflakes dance in the wind. "It's beautiful," she whispered. And for a moment William couldn't tell if she was speaking about the snow or remembering some distant winter from their past. These days her comments often seemed to exist in multiple time frames simultaneously, bridging decades with a single observation. William had learned to live in Kate's world rather than constantly trying to pull her into his. When she spoke about their children as if they were still small, he would engage with those memories rather than correcting her. When she asked about her long-deceased mother, he would share stories about the woman Kate had loved so deeply. It was easier for both of them when he followed her lead through the labyrinth of her changing mind. The home health aide, Maria, had become an invaluable presence in their lives. She arrived 3 mornings a week, bringing a warmth and expertise that complemented William's devoted but sometimes overwhelmed care. Maria had cared for many families facing similar journeys, and she possessed an intuitive understanding of Kate's needs. She would brush Kate's hair with infinite patience, help her with personal care when William needed a break, and somehow always knew exactly when to offer assistance and when to step back. Kate's appetite had diminished significantly, but she still enjoyed their afternoon tea ritual. William would prepare her favorite chamomile tea with honey, and they would sit together at the kitchen table where they had shared thousands of meals over the years. Sometimes Kate would forget what the cup in her hands contained, but she would still lift it to her lips and smile at the familiar warmth. These small victories felt monumental to William, proof that some things remained constant even as everything else shifted. Their evening conversations had evolved into something entirely different from the exchanges they had shared throughout their marriage. Kate might tell William about a dream she had the night before, describing people and places from various periods of her life all mixed together, in a narrative that defied chronology, but somehow made perfect emotional sense. William learned to listen not for factual accuracy, but for the feelings underlying her words, the loves and fears and joys that transcended the confusion of her illness. One particularly difficult evening, Kate became agitated and insisted that she needed to go home. No amount of gentle explanation could convince her that she was already home, in the house they had shared for over 30 years. Finally, William helped her put on her coat and walked with her around their neighborhood block. When they returned to their front door, Kate looked up at the familiar porch light and smiled with recognition. "Oh, we're home," she said with relief, as if seeing the house for the first time that day. The letters Kate had written during her clearer periods became a source of both comfort and anticipation for the family. She had given William specific instructions about when each letter should be opened, and he kept them in a special box on his dresser. Some were marked for holidays, others for significant family milestones that wouldn't occur for years. It was Kate's way of extending her presence into a future she wouldn't physically share with them. Sarah and Michael had begun taking turns staying overnight, partly to help William and partly to spend time with their mother, while she could still recognize them most of the time. These family sleepovers rekindled something from their children's youth, when the house would be full of multiple generations gathered around the dinner table. Kate seemed to draw energy from having her family close, even when she couldn't quite remember all their names or relationships to her. Dr. Peterson visited the house now instead of requiring Kate to come to the clinic. The trips had become too stressful and confusing for her, and the familiar environment of home seemed to provide better conditions for assessment. During his last visit, he spoke privately with William about what to expect in the coming months. The conversation was gentle but honest, preparing William for the progression of symptoms while emphasizing the importance of comfort and quality of life over medical interventions. Kate had begun talking to people who weren't there, carrying on conversations with her deceased parents and old friends who had passed years earlier. At first, this frightened William, but Maria explained that such experiences were common and often brought comfort to patients. William learned to accept these visits from Kate's past, even finding a strange peace in knowing that she was surrounded by love. Even if some of it existed only in her mind, the physical aspects of Kate's decline were becoming more apparent. She moved more slowly, tired more easily, and sometimes forgot how to perform simple tasks like buttoning her sweater or tying her shoes. William helped with these activities as naturally as breathing, their roles shifting from husband and wife to caregiver and patient, though the love underlying their relationship remained unchanged. Music had become increasingly important in Kate's daily routine. Songs from their youth could sometimes bring her back to herself in remarkable ways. William would play their wedding song, and Kate would remember the dance steps, swaying in his arms in their living room as if they were still newlyweds. These musical memories seemed to access a different part of her brain, one that remained relatively untouched by the disease. Winter deepened around them, and their world grew smaller and more intimate. The bustling social life they had once enjoyed gave way to quiet days filled with simple pleasures: warm soup shared at lunch, afternoon naps taken side by side, gentle conversations about whatever Kate could remember from moment to moment. William discovered that love could be distilled to its absolute essence, stripped of everything except the fundamental desire to care for and comfort another human being. The autumn leaves were falling more rapidly now, carpeting their yard in brilliant reds and golds. William found himself raking the same areas repeatedly, not because they needed it, but because the physical activity helped calm his restless mind. Kate would watch him from the living room window, sometimes recognizing him immediately, other times looking puzzled about the man working in her garden. These moments of non-recognition were becoming more frequent, and each one felt like a small death to William. Dr. Peterson had explained that Kate's condition would progress in stages, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different from understanding it intellectually. Some mornings Kate would wake up believing she was still in her 20s, looking around their familiar bedroom with confusion and asking for her mother. William learned to speak gently during these episodes to avoid correcting her abruptly, and to guide her slowly back to the present when possible. Their daughter Sarah had taken leave from her job to help care for her mother. She would arrive each morning with fresh flowers and a forced cheerfulness that broke William's heart. Sarah was trying so hard to maintain normalcy for everyone, but the strain was evident in the dark circles under her eyes and the way her voice sometimes trembled when she spoke to Kate. Their son Michael lived farther away but called every evening, sometimes talking to Kate for an hour about nothing in particular, just to hear her voice. Kate had begun what she called her project of love. On her clearer days, she would sit at their old wooden desk and write letters to family members and friends. She wrote to their grandchildren, sharing memories of their childhoods and expressing her hopes for their futures. She wrote to Sarah and Michael, thanking them for bringing such joy to her life and offering motherly advice for the years ahead. Most touchingly, she wrote multiple letters to William, each one sealed and dated for him to open at different times after she was gone. The routine of daily life took on new significance. Simple activities like sharing breakfast became sacred rituals. William learned to treasure the mornings when Kate remembered to add sugar to her coffee, and the evenings when she could follow the plot of their favorite television shows. He began taking photographs of ordinary moments, Kate reading in her favorite chair, Kate laughing at something on the news, Kate simply existing in their shared space. One afternoon, while going through old photo albums together, Kate stopped at a picture from their honeymoon in Ireland. She studied it for a long time, her finger tracing the outline of their younger selves. "We were so young," she murmured. "Did we know how lucky we were?" William looked at the photograph, remembering that carefree couple who had thought they had endless time ahead of them. "I think we knew we were happy," he replied. Maybe that was enough. Kate's relationship with their grandchildren became particularly poignant during this time. 8-year-old Emma would visit with her parents, and Kate would sometimes forget that Emma was her granddaughter, instead treating her like a neighborhood child who had come to visit. But Emma, with the adaptability of childhood, simply accepted whatever version of her grandmother was present that day. She would color pictures for Kate, read simple stories aloud, and chatter about school, bringing lightness to the increasingly heavy atmosphere. The nights were often the most challenging. Kate would sometimes wake up disoriented, not recognizing their bedroom or understanding where she was. William developed a gentle routine for these moments, speaking in soothing tones and guiding her to the window to look at their garden in the moonlight. The sight of the roses, even in darkness, seemed to comfort her and help her remember that she was home, that she was safe, that she was loved. During one particularly lucid afternoon, Kate asked William to help her clean out her jewelry box. As they sorted through decades of accumulated pieces, she would tell him the story behind each item. The pearl earrings from their 10th anniversary, the simple gold bracelet their children had given her for Mother's Day, the wedding ring that had never left her finger. "I want to make sure everything has a story," she explained, "so that even when I can't remember, the stories will still exist." William found himself becoming fiercely protective of their time together. He turned down social invitations, postponed unnecessary appointments, and structured his entire life around Kate's needs and moods. Friends and family sometimes suggested he needed to take care of himself too, but he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. These were their last chapters together, and he intended to be present for every page. The local pastor, Father Matthews, began visiting more regularly. Kate had always been a woman of faith, and these conversations seemed to bring her peace. She would talk about feeling grateful for the life she had lived and express confidence about what came next. "I'm not afraid of dying," she told the pastor during one visit while William listened from the kitchen. "I'm only sad about leaving William behind." Her words carried a strength and acceptance that both comforted and devastated him. As October turned to November, Kate's periods of confusion began lasting longer, and her moments of clarity became more precious and rare. But even in her confusion, she remained gentle and loving. She might not remember William's name, but she would still reach for his hand when she felt uncertain. She might forget what year it was, but she would still hum the songs they had danced to in their youth. Love, it seemed, existed deeper than memory, in places that illness couldn't entirely reach. The morning sun cast long shadows across the peaceful countryside as William sat by the kitchen window, watching his wife Kate tend to their small garden. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, but she still insisted on caring for the roses they had planted together 43 years ago on their first anniversary. The red blooms were her pride and joy, and even now, with her hands shaking slightly, she continued to nurture them with the same love and dedication she had shown throughout their marriage. William's heart ached as he observed the woman who had been his everything for nearly half a century. The doctors had been clear about Kate's condition 3 months ago. The progressive illness was taking its toll, stealing pieces of her memory day by day, yet her spirit remained unbroken. She would forget where she placed her reading glasses but remember every detail of their wedding day. She might struggle to recall what she had for breakfast, but could recite the lullabies she once sang to their children with perfect clarity. Their 2 grown children, Sarah and Michael, had been visiting more frequently lately. The family gatherings that once felt natural now carried an underlying tension, a shared knowledge that time was becoming precious. Everyone was trying to create more memories while Kate could still participate fully in them. William noticed how their children looked at their mother with a mixture of love and fear, the same way he found himself doing more often than he cared to admit. Kate turned toward the window and caught William watching her. She smiled and waved, that same radiant smile that had captured his heart when they were both 22 years old. He waved back, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. She had always been able to read his emotions, even now when her own thoughts sometimes felt scattered. There was an understanding between them that transcended words, a silent communication built over decades of shared experiences. That evening, as they sat together on their favorite porch swing, Kate leaned against William's shoulder. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly normal. "Tell me about the day we met again," she whispered softly. William had told this story countless times recently, but he never grew tired of sharing it. It seemed to anchor Kate to their shared history when other memories became elusive. He began recounting how they had bumped into each other at the university library, how she had been carrying an enormous stack of books about European history, and how he had clumsily knocked them all to the floor. Kate laughed softly at the familiar details, her fingers intertwining with his. These moments of clarity and connection had become more precious than gold to William. He treasured each laugh, each shared glance, each time she remembered his name without hesitation. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kate suddenly became very still. "William," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I'm not afraid. Whatever comes next, I'm not afraid because I've had a lifetime of love with you." Her words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they carried the weight of acceptance he wasn't ready to bear. The next few weeks passed in a blur of medical appointments, family visits, and quiet moments stolen between the chaos. William watched his beloved wife navigate her changing world with a grace that humbled him. She began organizing things around the house, writing little notes and leaving them in places where he would find them later. Some contained practical information about household tasks. Others were simply expressions of love and gratitude for their life together. Kate started having what she called her clear days and her foggy days. On clear days, she was almost like her old self, engaging in conversations about current events, asking about their grandchildren's school activities, and making plans for the garden's next season. On foggy days, she would sometimes forget where she was or mistake William for his father, whom she had never actually met but had heard about in stories. The most heartbreaking moments came when Kate would emerge from a foggy period with the sudden realization of what was happening to her. The fear and sadness in her eyes during these moments of awareness were almost unbearable for William to witness. Yet she would quickly compose herself, take his hand, and say something like, "We're going to be okay, my love. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay." Their evening ritual of sitting on the porch swing became even more important. Sometimes they would talk, sharing memories or discussing simple daily matters. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence. William began to understand that love could exist in the quiet spaces between words, in the gentle pressure of a hand squeeze, in the rhythm of synchronized breathing. One particularly difficult evening, after Kate had spent most of the day confused and agitated, she suddenly looked at William with complete clarity. "I want to make sure you know," she said softly, "that every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days when we argued about silly things, even the days when life felt overwhelming. All of it has been beautiful because it was ours." William held her close, feeling the weight of 43 years of shared life in her words, knowing that their time for making new memories was drawing to a close.